for joining today's corporate housing session. For today, we're going to be talking about operations. Specifically, how do we go about turning a unit over that's completely empty into a corporate ready house unit that's live within 14 days? And specifically, I'm going to go through a couple of slides in regards to how we go about using the system. Why is it important for us to systematize the way that we approach operations to ensure that when a client requests for housing, even though we may not have inventory readily available, we can actually make it happen within only in a matter of a couple of weeks, without the chaos, without forgetting things, without last minute runs or orders from Amazon, to ensure that when we provide the unit, it's moving ready, it's professionally managed, and we can get started with the client in the right foot as soon as they arrive home. So I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of slides. Also, talk about the system, perform a walkthrough as to what the Furnishing Inventory List looks like, and what that looks like in terms of your overall operations. Now, if you don't have a system, you're welcome to use the Furnished Inventory system. I'll show you exactly where to grab it within the community. That way, whenever you watch this video, you can go along and take a look at that information. So just to get started, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to share a couple of slides and then also just talk a little bit more about the system in particular and what we're looking to do with this system. So just to start off, I'm going to look here on my side. Just to start off, really what we're trying to do here is really what is the step-by-step A through Z process in regards to how to get inventory when it comes down to furnishings, in regards to how to actually get our team together in order for us to be able to turn over a unit that's completely empty all the way through to something that's moving and corporate ready within 14 days. Really what we're talking about is the step-by-step operational playbook that eliminates the chaos. You can systematize purchasing. So regardless if you're going from 1 unit to 2 units to 10 units, the process is relatively the same. And also making sure that you don't miss anything. Because the last thing that you want to do is have a client check in and have a bad experience because you missed something that could have been avoided. And the last thing you want to have is a brand new unit. You set expectations that's going to be super convenient, and then ultimately have a guest that checks in, calling you complaining that there's something missing that could have been caught within this process, and it could have been avoided through that process. Really, when we're talking about business to business standards, the main thing that you want to consider is in regards to is this housing really for vacationers or is it for corporate placements? Because for vacationers, if you miss something or there's something that's not caught within your process or system, guests will be able to tolerate quirks. If something is missing, it's not a big deal. We're only staying here for only a couple of days. It's not that big of a deal. Also, they really focus mostly on aesthetics as opposed to actually being able to live in the property. They want to have that glamorous shot, maybe that Instagram memorable moment. Not necessarily they want to live here because most of the time they will actually be outside your home. Your home is something that they will stay there for in a couple of hours, maybe to sleep. But really, other than that, vacationers are there for aesthetics and want to make sure that you have a good vibe within your home, not necessarily something that would be an inconvenience for them to live on long term. Like I mentioned, most of the vacationers will be staying in your property anywhere between 1 to 3 days. But when it comes down to corporate housing, that's actually quite a bit different. So whenever you think about corporate placements, you're talking about clients, right? You're talking about relocation coordinators, making sure that you understand what it is that you're trying to solve for them. Not necessarily the people that you're placing, but your real client, the relocation coordinator that will be referring your business again and again. You need to ensure that whenever you're placing someone, that they have given you their trust to do that for them, that you're mitigating as much of the chaos, as much of the headaches on their plates, because additional chaos, additional complaints, it's additional work for them. So definitely think about your placements with the customer in mind. But not only that, also think about the individual traveler, right? So you also want to think about the engineer, the project manager, the traveling nurse, essentially who it is that you're targeting to ensure that you have the necessary items within your system that they would actually enjoy based on feedback that you receive, based on things that you've learned in the community, based on feedback that perhaps the relocation coordinator shared with you, to ensure that the person that you're actually placing has all the necessary items to ensure that they will be able to live there for 30, 60, even 90 days at a time. Really, what the main thing that you want to focus on with these systems is that you ensure that from day one, they're able to work. If they rely on internet, making sure they have high speed internet, that they're able to sleep. One third of their life is spent sleeping, so you want to make sure it's comfortable, and that they're able to cook. Now, they could have those things at hotels, but because you're providing fully furnished temporary housing with a full kitchen, that adds value. And ultimately, you want to ensure that you have items where they can actually cook a meal 3 times a day to ensure that they're able to live and sustain their lives. So, when it comes down to the actual field systems, there's actually two sides to this story, right? And I'll now walk you through what that spreadsheet looks like and what that entails. But basically, there's two sides of the story. One is inventory planning. So these are items for every room, right? So you're itemizing items for every single room. You are quantifying essentially what those numbers look like. And then you ensure that you have a really good cost in terms of what are it that the items actually cost in terms of the actual value of what it would take for you to be able to purchase it. Also, taxes. Sales tax is a real thing. I know in some states like Nashville and maybe Texas, your state may not have sales tax, but you still want to ensure that if you don't live in some of those states, you account for those as well. The other thing to consider is this something that you're actually going to need help building? I know usually with bed frames, dressers, some of those bigger items may take maybe one or two people to actually put together and also ensure that you account for those. So in one side, you're planning for what's to come in terms of what inventory you're going to have, the quantity, as well as making sure that you have more or less an alignment in terms of your budget. On the other side, you have something that we call inventory management. So once you have actually planned out those things, have you actually ordered them? Have they actually showed up at the actual apartment or house? And are they actually ready? Right. So when we talk about inventory management, it's just making sure that you have actually not only planned for it, but also put it in the car if you're going to be purchasing it. The actual item has been ordered. You have accounted for it once it got actually received and that it's ready to go. And I'll talk a little bit more as to what it means to be ready, but essentially you just want to make sure that you're accounting for those things. So as we go through the spreadsheet as to what that looks like, just keep in mind those two systems. Those are the primarily two systems driving the Furnishing Inventory List system to ensure that you have everything accounted for and it's ready to go live date. So, in terms of the timeline, this is what it actually looks like. So, if we're talking about day 1 through 4, really what we're trying to do here is just walk the property. Really, what it means is that you need to be able to physically be able to walk the property if you haven't had already a team already done so. In some cases, where when you're buying a property, you will walk the property, do some inspection. One of the things that we like to do is actually take measurements of the actual rooms and what that would look like to ensure that we have those measurements in place when we actually order items like couches or bed or couches, TVs, all those things to ensure that the actual dimensions would actually be able to fit within the specific spacing within the house. So, for example, if you have a room, for example, let's just say a living room, and it's a length of 14 feet, but your couch is 13 or 12 feet, then there's going to be very small room for maybe end tables for you to have. So, you want to make sure that those dimensions align to what you're thinking of purchasing. And so, when you walk the property, you need to identify what are some of those measurements. How many items can I comfortably fit in these rooms? And then basically identify what is gonna go where. Obviously, for bedrooms, you're gonna have the bed frame and the actual bed, but then you might have some nightstands. You might have a dresser. You might have a couple different items, and that quickly you need to identify what those look like. Now, in conjunction, in day two, usually, then you're gonna start sourcing. So, within the furnishing inventory list, it's very much a starting starting this. I'll just show you real quick. And it's got links to all the different items that you would have as a starting list. Now, a lot of the links here, just to keep it simple, we did provide links to Amazon furnishings that we've ordered. So when we started, a lot of these things are a little bit more cost effective. They're not as expensive, but they're still good quality items that you can order. If you're getting started, the list that we have here is a pretty solid one, and I'll show you what that end at the end what it looks like, what we actually use for one of our units, specifically using this list, so that way you guys have a good example as to what that looks like in detail. But essentially, what you're doing is as you go through your list and identify which rooms need to have what, you also need to identify the vendors for where you're going to be sourcing your inventory. Now, in this case, like I said, we will be providing you a bunch of Amazon links and as well as other resources as well. But just making sure that you have an understanding depending on the quality. If it's something that's just getting started versus something luxury, you might have different vendors for some of those. Now, the links that are here, they can be replaced with some of your own. So just keep that in mind whenever you're going through this list. Just note that the framework, it's helpful, but in terms of where you actually source your units, it's helpful to have this beforehand before you go into an actual project. But essentially, this is where you'll be sourcing some of those couches, mattresses, the different vendors that you'll be using. In day five, also depending on the vendors that you use, we were able to receive things pretty quickly. Sometimes some of the bigger items do take a little bit longer to receive. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. If you're using vendors, I know for example, Wayfair, sometimes you might be able to get things a little bit cheaper, but I know sometimes they charge you for shipping fees, additional shipping fees that perhaps you hadn't accounted for, or maybe their shipping length takes a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two. I know in some situations we had a couch that was going to take 2 months to ship. So we just went ahead and canceled the order and ordered from another source and got it within a couple of days. So also keep that in mind as you're adding to your list in Amazon, Wayfair, Court, all those different vendors, that you ensure that what the timeline looks like in order for you to be able to receive the items. And typically, most of the time, if you're actually buying things on day two or day three, typically you'll get that within a week. So really, a lot, honestly, half of the time is just you waiting for the items to actually arrive to your property and ensure that they can be delivered. From day seven all the way through day 11, really what we're doing is we're assembling, right? We're assembling all the items, we're making sure things are ready, we're hanging curtains, we're installing smart locks, we're setting up our systems for Wi Fi. All of that information, like I said, comes in the furnishing inventory list. You'll have access to all those resources, but really, day seven all the way through 11, we're assembling. So either that being yourself and your partner, just yourself, maybe you have a team, depending on how big, how many resources you have, you need to ensure that you're also accounting for those in your cost. If you're essentially paying yourself $3.99 to do the assembling, then perhaps you might not add those costs. But if you do get some help, you need to ensure that as you're planning through some of this, you're also accounting for labor costs and what that looks like and what that help you would need. So making sure that you're planning ahead and knowing that as items come in, they're gonna have to be assembled and ensure that you have that information available to you and what's actually come in, what's still in transit, and perhaps what was missing, what didn't get ordered, things like that. You'll account for those. Day 10 through 13. So really what we're trying to do is we're just trying to finish up things. We're trying to making sure that we're doing some final checks, walkthroughs. We're scheduling the professional cleaners to make sure that they're able to clean and also making sure that we're scheduling the professional photography. So usually within the last 2 days, like for example, the day before go live is a photography, and then the day before is we got professional cleaners coming in, doing the last check, sanitation, and making sure that we're fixing any smaller things. And really by day 14, we're going live with the unit. So at this point, there's a completely different pipeline, different timeline as to what the marketing side looks like. But in terms of operations, really it shouldn't take you more than 2 weeks to go through the entire process within the furnishing inventory list. The main thing to think about really when it comes down, I mentioned half of it It's going to be just you waiting on the actual items to arrive, depending on your vendors. So you want to make sure that you have experience with some vendors as a community as well, in terms of who do they use, who are some vendors that provide high quality items that perhaps may not be as expensive, or if you're having problems with a lot of vendors that are coming in with maybe 2 or 3 weeks shipping time, perhaps you consider who you're using as a vendor as well, especially if you're in a tight timeline as you have here. Now, us, we're up at a professional level, right? So we already know we have our systems dialed in pretty quickly to know that within 2 weeks we can go from walking a property, getting approved, getting at least to actually getting the measurements and then going all the way through to actually getting it ready within 2 weeks. So this is more or less the high level timeline. When it comes down to actually sourcing, like I mentioned, there's a couple different ways. The main thing is what are some of the things that you can get perhaps that are pretty standard. They're not going to change a whole lot. For example, with Amazon, you might be able to get pretty good bedding, kitchen items, bathrooms, supplies, small appliances, smart locks, decor. Some of those things, like the vendors, are really good with Amazon. You get them fast, and then for whatever reason they don't work, they also have really good return policies. With Wayfair, IKEA, Core, and some of the other bigger vendors, perhaps it might make more sense to bring in the furniture. I know with IKEA, you can actually go and touch the items, the furniture, making sure that you actually like them and they're comfortable. So, for example, couches, hand tables, dressers, coffee tables, all those things are very good. And then you can look for them for specific sales. I know sometimes there's holiday sales, so you may be able to take advantage of some of those. Now, also, Facebook Marketplace. I know, for example, right now on the date of filming in May 20th, there's a lot of garage sales happening. So if you perhaps don't have the capital to invest into something new and you want to go to garage sales, then there might be offers. You can actually find pretty good high quality items. Just know that this is gonna take away time from your business and actually building a pipeline when it comes down to people that you're targeting. But if you're tight in cash, there are garage sales that are out there that actually have pretty good items. And then you can align your decor based on the colors of those couches, tables, whatever it is that you find. And some of them you might be able to find at a pretty good discount, anywhere between 30 to maybe 50% below retail. I know, for example, that we've actually used people that buy pallets from Target. Literally, they get them in bulk and then they actually sell it to us at a major discount. So we actually have a couple of people that do this professionally in Facebook Marketplace, where they actually buy pallets of items at a huge discount, and then they resell it in Facebook Marketplace. So if you're tight on cash, there might be a couple people within your market that might actually be doing this right now. All right. So the other thing to think about is, in general, this is what the breakdown looks like in terms of the budget. In general, you're going to be so for the particular one that I'm sharing with you, this one's a 3-2. If we go all the way through the end, you can see the total amount that we paid for this particular furnishings once everything was said and done was around $10,000. So 8,900 came for the actual items, around 700 came for taxes. We estimated about 22 hours of labor, which ended up costing us about this amount, actually a little bit more. And so with contingency, we estimated that roughly it was going to be around $1,600 with everything included. So when it comes down to this, is if we do the actual breakdown, you can see here in general, these are just general items. We spent around $2,000 just in general items. For the master bedroom with a king size mattress, that was around 1,500. For the kitchen, it was around 1,200, and some of the other rooms. The other thing that perhaps people don't consider too much in regards to what could actually happen is that the contingencies. One of the things that we like to keep track of and making sure that we have a good understanding as to what this looks like, decorations will vary quite a lot depending on your market and whether you decide to source locally or through a third party company like Amazon or Target or some other ones. Art is going to vary across the different markets, especially if you're working with a couple different units that you're working through a couple different markets as well. some of the cost for decoration and contingencies is going to be a little bit different. For us, what we like to do is that regardless of whatever price or budget that we have, we always allocate about 15% to decorations and contingencies. So regardless of what we're doing, we already know there's going to be things that will break and we'll have to buy again. We perhaps won't have time to go through the entire return process because that could actually delay our process. So we'll go ahead and take the bite in terms of the contingency, but we'll go ahead and repurchase something knowing that we already have this error margin accounted for within our budget. There might be items perhaps that with inflation nowadays, you thought maybe in your initial budget or whenever you created your furnishing inventory list a couple of months ago, maybe the price was $50. Now it's $60. So there's the contingency where prices might go up. So with this contingency, it's helpful because it doesn't allow you to slow down. You have already planned for things to go wrong. And so ultimately what you want to have is have this contingency. So regardless of inflation, maybe transportation costs have gone up. If you're paying someone to haul your trash, or maybe even hidden fees come up, you have already accounted for them. So it doesn't slow you down. You have already planned for this and you have already budgeted for this. So even if something does come up that might be a quote unquote surprise, you have already accounted for it and you have taken that into account. So that way you don't skip that line, you can go ahead and move forward and finish the actual process within 14 days. Now, the next thing, it comes down to what does it actually look like when it comes down to the order fulfillment pipeline? What we mean in terms of the order fulfillment pipeline, and you'll see that within the furnishing inventory list, is that initially you had your inventory planning phase. You have already accounted for your budget. Now, at the end of the furnishing inventory list, what you have is basically a checklist, right? Is does it need to order or have I already ordered it? If you have already ordered, you can essentially mark it here, right? I have already ordered it, it's already accounted for. And essentially what you have in terms of number of items here on the order column should tie to the quantity that you need for that particular item. There's other sections as well as to have you actually received that particular item. So when Amazon or Wayfair or those third-party companies say that they have actually delivered the item, can you confirm that you have actually received it? And then the last thing is making sure that the item is actually really functional and ready to go. Now, what I mean by ready to go, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is not necessarily that the item that you have actually received the item and open up the box and confirm that it's there. What I mean is that the item has actually been assembled, right? If you need someone to actually help you assemble by frame, making sure that you have that in place. It has been placed in service and it's in the final position. What that means is basically, so just to give an example, whenever we're thinking about installing a TV, for example, in a living room, it's not necessarily about getting the box, opening up the TV, right? Taking up the film protection and just ensuring that the actual TV is there. What we mean is that is ready is that there's no cracks on the actual screen. You have actually inspected and make sure that there's this item doesn't need to be returned to the provider. The other thing that it means is, for example, if you're going to mount it to the TV, do you have the actual wall mount? Do you have someone professional that's going to install it? Or if you're going to install it, making sure that you have a good understanding as to what that looks like. The other thing is, well, once you install the TV and mount it to the actual wall, you actually need to turn it on, making sure that the actual TV actually works, making sure that the controller works, ensuring that the TV actually connects to your internet if it's a smart TV, setting it up, all those different things. So I'm not talking about necessarily just confirming that you have received the item, but it's actually functioning, is within placement, and you have actually inspected that it actually works as intended. So when it comes down to this actual list here at the end, it's not necessarily that it's ready, but it's actually functional, it has been fully assembled, and it's working properly as intended. Because the last thing that you want to have is have someone reach out to you and say, oh, the item is full and functional, but then when the guest comes in, it says, what's going on? And my TV hasn't been installed. It's literally just sitting at the corner just sitting there, right? So you want to make sure that you have evidence that that has been done. And so that's what we mean by order fulfillment, right? You have ordered the things and you have done the walkthrough in terms of quantity. You have actually ordered the items, right? There, the vendor has actually received your order and payment. Once that order has been made, making sure that you have actually received the items. So you're taking inventory to ensure those items have been received and that they're ready, right? What that means is that you have actually tested them and they work as intended and they have actually been assembled. Once that fulfillment pipeline has been done, then you're done checking off all of these boxes here. Now, when it comes down to Jorge, I have, if you were to ask me, what are some of the things that perhaps I can not go without? And what are some of the things that perhaps I should go without if it's my first time? Now, over here in the checklist on the furnishing inventory list, you'll notice there's quite a big amount of items. So right here it just says 182 different items. Now, keep in mind, even though there's 182 different items, you'll notice over here on the column A, we don't have check bots for some items. Now, some of these things that I have here is things that we have actually ordered for this particular unit. And just to show you at high level, here we go. So this is a unit that we put together based on this checklist. So I'll just go through it pretty quickly. You can see the couch. Some of the decoration here was part of that contingency that I mentioned. So some of these things may not be in this particular list, but that's because, at least for decoration, we prefer to do them a little bit more local as we have some more control over some of them. I know sometimes when we order art from Amazon, it doesn't look as good or the dimensions aren't as what we expected. So we rather source locally for some of these items. But in general, you're gonna have the couch, you're gonna have a TV stand, you're gonna have the bed frame, the mattress, you're gonna have the pillows, you're gonna have the nightstands, the lamps, the curtains, the dresser. You can see it here on the end. All of those things will become included. So, for example, with the kitchen, you have your coffee maker, water boiler, toaster, blender, all these different things that you can see here. And obviously, there's a couple other things that aren't here that would also be part of that. So, making sure that you have visibility to those items like a fruit bowl and all those other things. So, when it comes down to the actual rooms, there's going to be some things that are a little bit duplicate, just depending on how nice you want some of these things to be. Which actually, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. There we go. So depending on how nice of some of those things you want to be, right? So for example, the mat you're gonna have, for example, for this room, we decide it's gonna be a queen set. This is what the matrix looks like. You can actually click on this link and access it as well. It's got some notes in regards to why we chose that particular item, the quantity, the last price based on listing, the tax rate. So for us, we're based in Indiana. Our sales tax rate 7.5. If you live in a location that has zero sales tax, you want to change this to zero. Or if you live in other states that have higher tax rate, you want to be able to update this to something else. Labor costs and all those things. Now, keep in mind, some of these things are duplicate. So if you want more of a basic level, then perhaps choose this other one. It's a little bit less expensive, which actually does make sense because this one's a little bit more. But in general, it's usually less expensive than the premium. We didn't need to get skirts, do beds. We instead just order sheets, a comforter, and some of those things. So think about what it is that you want to provide to your clients, and does it make sense to add all these items or just some of them? So whenever you think about what's essential to you, I'll go ahead and share a list here shortly as to what that looks like in terms of the beds, kitchen, and all those things. But as you're planning what it is that you're planning to include, just know that you're not going to need every single item on this list. There's going to be things that are essential. There are some that are extra and are nice to have. But in order for us to be able to fulfill a corporate contract, the expectation is set that there's a minimum set of requirements that need to be had within any of our units. So just know that you don't need to order every single thing from this list. There's going to be things that you're going to want to add. There's some things that are essential, and we highly recommend you to get those. But just know not every single item you'll need from this list. So just to show you, let me just go back real quick in terms of make sure two. All right. So let me make sure I have that here. So whenever it comes down to the actual items that are non-negotiable and you need to have, is that you need to have obviously a mattress, you need to have a bed frame. One of the things that will increase the longevity of your mattress is going to be a mattress protector. Definitely want to get that. It's a lot easier to replace a $20 to $40 mattress protector than a $600 mattress every turnover. Also, pillows, pleasure protectors, sheet sets. In particular, we use some of the brands that are fast drying. The reason behind this is because depending on the quality of your bed sheets, it may take longer for them to dry. So, what that means, at least for your operations, is that your cleaners may take anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes extra just to dry your sheets or your protectors or your comforters or your bed or anything like that, which ultimately you will be able to incur additional costs. So that's an additional 30 minutes to an hour if you're paying them by the hour when it comes down to your cleaner. So that's just additional cost. So just be mindful of that whenever you're selecting some of the sheets, the beds, to make sure that they're fast drying. That way you don't keep delaying some of those items, especially if you have Sunday check-ins, right? You don't want to have your cleaners still be cleaning or drying the bed sheets, things like that, when your guests are expected to check in. The other thing, blackout curtains, laundry baskets. So over here is just a complete list. You can look through some of them as well. The other one for the kitchen, people love their coffee, so make sure that you spend some money on a quality Keurig coffee maker. Pots and pans, people are expected to cook. They're going to be there for anywhere between 30 to 60 to 90 days. So you want to make sure that you have those essentials in here. So here's a whole list of different items. So I just want to make sure that you guys capture those as well. But like I said, the complete list is here as well. So you can look at them in detail, compare some of them. Perhaps some of this you like, some of them perhaps not as much, and you want to use an alternative. So making sure that you have those. The other thing to make sure that you're accounting for is making sure that how easy is your property for guests to just be able to check in and check out. We definitely like to make sure that we have touchless deadbolts. Now for this particular unit, the one that I share here, this one has, I don't know if the picture will come up here. Here we go. So this one actually has two in this particular one. So one for the back and one for the front in terms of the actual house. Primarily because there's additional space here for people to be able to enter. So we wanted to, in this particular one, the way that it is set up, let me see here. It's actually right across a very busy street here. This is actually in Central Avenue. It's a very busy street that a lot of people drive through. So instead of having the guests come all the way from the back all the way to the front, what we thought is we'll go ahead and give them access so that way they can come in here for the first time. But once they actually come in, get their garage remote and all those things to make it easier for them, once they actually go and park in the garage, go inside, there's a door here. They can go through the back. They can actually access through the back door. So technically, the back door becomes now their main entrance. So just thinking about those things and the convenience for the client ultimately, whenever you're thinking about your planning stage for this as well. Let me see here. The other thing I wanted to talk about, there we go. So making sure that you have your internet set up, your smart TVs. Don't forget about your fire extinguishers. Those are very important. Vacuums, just empowering people to actually do their own self cleaning while they're at the house. It's very important. So all of these things that I had mentioned here. So from the bedroom to the kitchen to the systems, these are essentials that you must have. The other items we can more or less forget. Now, when it comes down to actual execution, there's really five things that you need to think about, right? Making sure that as you're going through the property, you're going through and using this furnishing inventory system. This furnishing inventory system is available within the school community. So if you guys go to Classroom, go to free tools and resources, it's literally the second one. So feel free to download it, use it, implement it within your Nets property. You can click in here, download a copy. You can simply hit the download button, and then you'll get that form. Definitely, I would encourage you to do that if you want a more online savvy version. So, if you guys have already created your host account, this comes as well. Let me see here. So, if you have already come into Remap login, sign in, already created your host account, you can come in here, sign in. Let me just do that real quick. You can come in here, sign in. You can do let's see here, where to go. You can go to the investor tools, furnishing inventory, and this list will help you generate it. So if you want more of an online version with all these different things that I had mentioned here, you can also access it here as well. You have access to it for a 14-day trial. If you want to upgrade to that system and making sure that you have a full list online without necessarily having to scramble for the Excel version. So just to go back real quick though, in terms of the actual traps or things to think about, just as a final thought, making sure that you're ordering things, you're not just walking the property and guessing what you're ordering, making sure that you have a good system that as you do your first walkthrough, you actually know exactly what you're going to get and you're not wasting time. I know some operators sometimes go in there, think, have a list in their mind of what they're going to get, and then just whenever they're going to order something, their brain fogs and they forget what they were going to order. So making sure that you have a checklist in place to ensure that you know exactly what you're going to get. Also, don't forget that contingency is real. There's going to be times that inflation is going to hit. Transportation costs all of a sudden is going to be super expensive. Shipping costs are going to be super expensive. Art may have changed in value. That may have cost maybe $20 just a couple of days ago, that's maybe $30, $40. So making sure that you don't get stopped by that contingency as you're planning through some of those things, because ultimately you might have second trips, you might have missing pieces, or you might even have hidden fees that you didn't even know they existed. So you want to make sure that you have those in place. Also, don't forget the small stuff too, right? It's all about the guest experience. So making sure that you're not ignoring paper towel holders, hangers, brooms, things like that. So one of the things that we see quite often, if you forget some of those things, guests will complain, right? So you don't want to come in into this perspective that you're a professional corporate housing company, that you're providing convenience to the guests just for them to say, I don't have hangers to hang my clothes. To have some of those. So you want to make sure that you're not forgetting some of that small stuff. And the furnishing inventory list will help you capture those as well. Also, the other thing to think about when it comes down to actually what it is that you're buying. So notice, for example, for this particular house, depending on how your frame actually looks like, it might have an impression where people might be able to see underneath the bed frame, making sure that you have an understanding as to what that looks like. For this instance, the bed frame is relatively low to the ground, so it's not that bad. But I know there's some bed frames that go up really high, and so that can make it seem like it's a little bit cheap when it comes down to that. So just making sure that you have a good first impression whenever you're buying some of those. Either you can upgrade to premium frames, especially if you're only seeing sticks of the bed, or maybe getting some bed skirts to have a more premium experience with the actual bedding. And then the other thing is making sure that as you go through this and you're saying to yourself, is this something that is ready? Right? Making sure that you have actually gone through that process and actually have an understanding as to, hey, is this actually ready? Is this functional? Is this something that I can use from day one? Is this something that I have tested and actually works? For example, we test out the lamps, right? Sometimes we get the lamps with the little, what's it called? The little light bulb, and making sure that the actual light bulb actually works. Because ultimately, the last thing that you want to have is someone gets up in the middle of the night, they try to use the actual lamp, and then the light bulb doesn't work. So making sure that you are consistent with those things and making sure that you're not checking off the ready list or the ready checkbox until you have actually gone through them, verified, and tested that those items actually work. So, like I mentioned, next three steps in regards to what it is that you need to do is number one, you need to actually download the playbook. You need to download this list. I have already shown you what that looks like, or where you can download it. Like I said, you can also access it through your host account if you have already created a host account and start playing with that as well. Go back. The other thing is if you're already going through a unit, test it, right? Try it out, see how it works for you, making sure that you have it open, mark things in terms of quantities. What are some of the things that you're expected to have when it comes down to those items, and making sure that you don't have anything missing. And then the last thing is you need to actually calculate, right? Making sure that you have a budget. What are the material costs? What are the taxes? Are you going to have labor costs included? The more you're aware of your particular cost, the more you can control and ultimately decide, is this something worthwhile to you to pursue in terms of the items that you will actually be using? You need to compare to them. If originally, let's say you had a $8,000 budget, but now you have to take into account sales and labor, and then that blows out your budget, making sure that you have an understanding what are some of the things that perhaps I don't need to include for me to still be able to meet my budget, or what are some of the things that I need to adjust in order to meet that threshold, or perhaps is my threshold too low? Do I need to add to my budget? So having this system will help you get a really good understanding as to what this looks like, what the actual implications are in terms of cost, and ultimately making sure that whatever you have here in terms of items received actually matches to the value of items that you have ordered. You'll be surprised a lot of people, because they didn't take into account some of the things that they ordered. Now they're scrambling last minute, they're reordering things. Some of those things may actually be more expensive because now they have to pay premium to get them shipped faster. So making sure that you have good control over your overall costs, and ultimately this will help you save time, money, and headaches whenever you're furnishing your next property. With that, we're finished up with the session. I think we have maybe a couple of questions. I do see maybe Sarah. Do you have anything? I want to make sure that we leave off that session here shortly. And if not, we'll go ahead and call this session out. Let me know if there's anything else that we need to revisit. Oh, hey, Sarah. All right. Sounds good. All right. Bye, everyone. Take care.